My son leaned close to my ear, close enough that I could smell the wine on his breath, and he whispered, "Mother, you're embarrassing me. Please. Just sit there and don't say anything else." The whole table had gone quiet. 40 people in a private room with gold light pouring down from the chandeliers, and every one of them had heard me tell a small, harmless story about Marcus as a boy. A story about how he used to fall asleep in church with his head on my shoulder, that was all, and my son looked at me like I had spilled wine across his future. I sat there holding my little glass of water, and I smiled the way women my age learn to smile, the smile that hides everything. What Marcus didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 3 weeks later, in a room very much like that one, a quiet man in a grey suit would stand up, open a leather folder, and finish a single sentence, and by the time he finished it, everyone at that engagement dinner would understand that the woman they'd treated like furniture was the only person who had ever held the keys. If this story already feels familiar to you, stay with me, because what I found out next changed everything I thought I knew about my own son. Let me start where it really started. Raymond, my husband, had been gone 8 years by then, but our house in Charlotte still remembered him. He'd built things for a living, started with one truck and a borrowed ladder, and ended up putting up half the office parks on the east side of the city. You'd never have guessed it to look at him. He wore the same brown jacket for 15 years and kept a heavy black fountain pen in his shirt pocket, and he signed everything with it. Birthday cards, checks, notes on the back of grocery receipts when he wanted to say, "I love you," without using the words. He used to find me in the kitchen on Sunday mornings and pull me into a slow dance with no music playing at all. "Eleanor," he'd say, "we are the 2 luckiest people in North Carolina." For a long time, I believed him. Marcus was our only child, and he came late, after years of us thinking we'd never have one, so we poured everything into that boy. And back then, I need you to know this, because it matters later, he was sweet. The kind of boy who climbed into our bed during thunderstorms long after he was too old for it and pressed his face into my arm. "Nothing bad can happen if I'm with you, Mama." I held on to that sentence for years. I just never imagined I'd be the one who needed protecting, or that the storm would be him. Money changes some people slowly, the way water wears down stone. You don't see it happening. You only see, one day, that the shape of everything has changed. It started after his first marriage ended. He came out of it angry, not at himself, at the world, and he decided the thing that had been missing was money. He went after it the way some men go after a drink. Raymond saw it before I did. He always saw things before I did. "He's chasing the wrong thing," my husband told me one night on the porch, the wind chimes turning over in the dark. "And one day he's going to look at us and see a bank instead of a mother and father." I told him not to talk that way. He just took my hand. "I'm going to make some arrangements, Eleanor, so that whatever happens, you'll be safe. You let Gerald worry about the rest." I didn't ask what he meant. I trusted Raymond the way you trust the floor to hold you up. You don't think about it, you just walk. What saved me, in the lonely years after he died, came from a direction I never expected. I'd had a small fall the winter I turned 69. Marcus's solution was to forward me a brochure for an assisted living community. He never came to see if I could climb my own stairs. He sent a brochure. But the home care agency sent a woman named Marie Dawson. Marie was somewhere in her late 30s, with the kind of calm that makes a room slow down. Within a month, I'd have paid her just to sit with me. She noticed things that I'd stopped using the dining room because eating alone in it hurt too much, and one Tuesday she set 2 places and ate her lunch there with me so the room wouldn't feel like a grave. I asked her once why she did this work for women whose own families had wandered off. She was washing a teacup and didn't turn around. My mother spent her last years in a facility. My brothers said they'd visit. They didn't. The night before she passed, she asked me why the people she loved stopped showing up. She set the cup in the rack. So now, I show up. That's the whole answer. I just show up. She never once asked me about my money. Not what Raymond had left, not what the house was worth. Not a single time in 2 years. Do you understand how rare that became in my life? Everyone who came near me eventually got around to the money. Marie never did. Remember that, when we reached the end. The other person who never asked was Andre. My grandson was 16 now, all long arms and serious eyes, and somewhere in the wreckage of his parents' divorce he'd decided his grandmother's porch was the safest place he knew. He'd come on Saturdays and we'd shell butter beans and not talk, which is the best kind of company. Every time he left, he hugged me like he meant it. Love you, Grandma. So that was my life. A son who called only when he needed me. A caregiver who showed up because she chose to. A grandson who loved me for free. I'd made a kind of peace with it. And then Marcus met Sloane Whitfield, and the ground shifted under all of us. The Whitfields had money the way some families have a last name. It was just who they were. Harold Whitfield owned car dealerships and buildings downtown, and he wore his success like cologne. You could smell it before he entered a room. His daughter Sloane was beautiful and bright, and certain of her place in the world. When Marcus started dating her, something in him stood up straighter. He started talking about circles and the right rooms, and he bought a watch that cost more than my first car. I met them at a dinner Harold hosted, and within 20 minutes, I understood exactly where I ranked. Harold called me Eleanor before I'd offered him my name, the way you'd say the name of a town you were just passing through. When he asked what Raymond had done, Marcus answered for me. Dad was in construction, as if my husband had carried other men's bricks instead of building the very kind of buildings Harold collected rent from. I opened my mouth to add to it, and Marcus gave me a sharp look across the table. I closed it. That was the first time my own son told me, without a single word, to make myself smaller. I'll say one thing for Sloane, though, because I want to be fair. Once that night, while Marcus was performing for her father laughing too hard, agreeing with things I knew he didn't believe, I caught her watching him with something that wasn't admiration. Something closer to doubt, as if even she could see he was trying too hard to be a man he wasn't. The look passed in a second, and she covered it with a smooth smile, but I saw it, and I tucked it away. The engagement dinner was 3 months later, and that's where this story truly turns. It was a private room at the most expensive restaurant in the city, the kind of place where the waiters fold your napkin when you stand up. Harold had paid for all of it, and made sure everyone knew. There were Whitfield cousins and partners, and a state senator the family golfed with. There was Marcus, glowing. There was Sloane, radiant. And there was Andre, 16 and uncomfortable in a tie, seated all the way at the far end near me, which told me everything about where they'd placed us both. I'd worn my good blue dress, the one Raymond said made me look like the prettiest school teacher in Carolina, and I'd brought a small gift, a framed photo of Marcus as a baby asleep on Raymond's chest, both of them with their mouths open the exact same way. Dinner was lovely until the toasts. Harold spoke first, long and pleased with himself, then a cousin, then Sloane. And then Sloane's mother turned to me with a bright smile. Eleanor, surely the mother of the groom has a few words. I stood. I told the small story Marcus as a boy, asleep against my shoulder in church, the preacher lowering his voice so he wouldn't wake him. I said I'd watched that little boy become a man, and that wherever Raymond was tonight, he was proud. 90 seconds. There was nothing in it but love. A few people smiled. One older woman dabbed her eyes. And Marcus stood, walked the length of that table, leaned to my ear, and whispered the words that opened this story. Then he straightened up, smiled at the room, and said brightly, "My mother gets a little emotional these days. We love her." He patted my shoulder twice the way you'd pat a dog, and the table laughed, that warm, forgiving laugh, Aunt Old Mother's sweet. And he walked back to his seat beside Harold Whitfield, and never looked at me again. I sat down. I picked up my water glass so my hands would have something to do. And down at the far end of that table, 16-year-old Andre was looking at me with an expression I'll never forget, because he had seen all of it. And he was the only one in that gold-lit room who looked like something had just been broken. I did not cry. Not there. I'd learned, somewhere in the long years of being made smaller, that my tears were the one thing they couldn't take if I didn't hand them over. But on the drive home, Andre, who'd slipped away from the head table to ride with me, claiming he was tired, which we both knew was a kindness, was quiet, a long mile. Then he said, "Grandma, can I tell you something? And you won't get mad." Always. At the table, before you stood up. Dad and Mr. Whitfield were talking low. I was close enough to hear. He swallowed. "Mr. Whitfield asked if the trust was settled, and Dad said, 'It will be. She'll sign whatever I put in front of her. She always does.'" The wind chimes were the first thing I heard when I pulled into my own driveway. Turning softly in the dark, the way they had the night Raymond told me he'd make arrangements. "She'll sign whatever I put in front of her." I sat in the car a long time after Andre went inside, because for the first time I understood that the dinner hadn't been a wound. It had been a setup, and I had a question now, a cold and clear one. What trust? If you've ever sat quietly while someone you raised made you feel small, if you know that particular silence, then do me a kindness before we go on. Tap like and subscribe so you don't lose the rest of this, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? I read every single one. Now, let me show you what I found in my husband's desk. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at Raymond's old desk and started opening drawers. Most of it I knew the deed to the house, the car titles, the small accounts I lived on. But in the bottom drawer, behind a box of his reading glasses, I found a folder I hadn't opened in 8 years. On the front, in that heavy black ink from his fountain pen, for Eleanor. "When you're ready, R." My hands were not steady when I opened it. Inside was a letter and a business card. The card belonged to a man named Gerald Vance, attorney, downtown. And the letter, in Raymond's hand, said only this: "My Eleanor, if you're reading this, then either I've made you curious or someone's made you afraid. Either way, it's time. Don't carry it alone. Call Gerald, he's been waiting longer than you'd think. Everything is already taken care of. You were always the smartest person I ever met. You just let me do the talking. Now it's your turn. All my love, every day, R." I read it 4 times. Then I sat very still, while the morning came up grey through the window, and I understood that my husband had left me a door, and behind it was something I'd been standing next to my whole life, without knowing. I called Gerald Vance at 9 o'clock. "Mrs. Hammond," he said, when his voice came on the line, warm and careful. "Eleanor. My word. I've been hoping you'd call for 8 years." Gerald Vance's office was in an old brick building that smelled of paper and coffee, and the moment I walked in, I knew Raymond had loved this man. There were photos on the wall, my husband, younger, with his arm around a younger Gerald, both squinting into some long-ago sun. Gerald was in his 70s now, white-haired, reading glasses low on his nose. He took both my hands. "You look just like he described you. He used to say, 'Eleanor walks into a room and the room gets better.'" He smiled. "Sit. Let me tell you what your husband did." He opened a thick folder, the edges soft with age. "Raymond came to me about 3 years before he passed," Gerald said. He'd watched some things he didn't like in Marcus. The way money had started to talk for the boy. He didn't make a scene about it that wasn't Raymond. He just said, "Gerald, I need to build something Eleanor can stand on no matter what the weather does," so we built it. He folded his hands. "Now, there's a legal name for what we built, and I'll give it to you, but then I'm going to tell you what it actually means, because the words matter less than the truth underneath them. It's called an irrevocable family trust." He looked at me over the glasses. "In plain English, Eleanor. Everything Raymond spent 40 years building is locked up safe in a box, and nobody, not Marcus, not Harold Whitfield, Not anybody can get a single dollar out of that box without your say-so. Not while you're alive. I was trying to follow. So the money is yours? Yours to manage? I manage the box. But the box exists for exactly one person. He said it gently but firmly. You. The lawyers would call you the sole lifetime beneficiary. What that means, in real words, is this. Every dollar in there exists to take care of you, for as long as you live, whether you ever lift a finger or not. It was never Marcus's money. It was never going to flow to him while you breathed. He has been calling this office for 3 years, asking when the estate gets handed over. Gerald shook his head slowly. There is no estate to hand over. There's a trust, and he isn't the one it answers to. The room felt very quiet. I asked the question that mattered. How much, Gerald? He told me. I won't pretend I remember the next minute clearly. I remember the number $9 million, give or take, and growing and thinking it had to be a mistake, because I'd spent 8 years clipping coupons and turning the heat down to save on the bill. Gerald, let me sit with it, the way you let a wave finish before you speak to a person standing in the surf. Why didn't he tell me? I finally said, and now there were tears, because Raymond had carried this alone at the end of his life so I wouldn't have to. 2 reasons, Gerald said quietly. First, because he knew you. He knew if Marcus came crying with a sad story, you'd have handed it over without blinking. Raymond used to say, my Eleanor would give away the roof to a man holding an umbrella. He paused. And second, because there's a part of this he wanted you to find only when you needed it, which, if you're sitting here, you finally do. He slid one more document across the desk. This is the part that changed everything. The trust takes care of you for life. But it doesn't just vanish when you're gone. Somebody inherits what's left. And here's what Raymond did that nobody expects. He tapped the page. He didn't name that person himself. He handed that decision to you. The lawyers call it a power of appointment. I'll say it the way your husband would have. He looked right at me. After you're gone, Eleanor, the entire fortune goes to whoever you choose. You can name Marcus. You can name a stranger on the bus. You can name a charity, or your grandson, or no one at all. You can change your mind on a Tuesday and change it back on Wednesday. Everything Raymond built rests on your signature and only yours. Nobody on this earth can sign it for you. I stared at the line at the bottom where a signature would go. Marcus told a man at his engagement dinner, I said slowly, that I'd sign whatever he put in front of me. Gerald took off his glasses and folded them, and for the first time his warm face went hard. Then I think we'd better make sure you understand exactly what you're signing. And exactly what you're not. I left that office a different woman than the one who'd walked in. Not louder, just awake. For 3 days I told no one. Then Marcus came by, and I learned how far he was willing to go. He showed up unannounced on a Thursday with his expensive watch and a leather portfolio, and Sloane waiting in the car at the curb, not bothering to come in. He kissed my cheek cold, quick, and got straight to it. Mom, I want to apologize about the dinner. I was stressed. You know how Harold can be. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where he'd done his homework for 18 years, and opened the portfolio. But I'm glad I'm here, because there's some estate stuff we need to take care of. It's all very normal. Just makes things simpler for everyone down the road. He slid a stack of papers toward me. The top sheet read, Power of Appointment, Exercise and Designation. He had a copy. Of course he did. Harold's lawyers had drawn it up. It just confirms everything flows to me when the time comes. Marcus said, uncapping a cheap plastic pen and setting it on top of the stack. Which is what Dad would have wanted anyway. Sign at the tabs. I've already had it looked over. I looked at the cheap pen sitting on top of my husband's entire life's work. By whom? Harold's people, top firm, so you don't have to worry about a thing. Marcus, why now? Why this week? He hesitated a flicker, and then the truth came out the side of it. the way it does with men who've stopped practicing it. Because Harold wants the family's assets aligned before the wedding. And, honestly, Mum, it's embarrassing every time it comes up, having to explain that my own mother is sitting on the family money and won't formalize anything. Makes me look like I can't manage my affairs. You're getting older. People expect this handled. You're getting older. There it was. The phrase they reach for when they want to file you under soon irrelevant. And if I don't sign? His jaw tightened. Mum, don't be difficult. Don't be emotional about it. It's just paperwork. He pushed the pen an inch closer. Everybody's waiting on you. I looked at my son, at the cheap pen, at Sloane in the car, who hadn't so much as waved, and I smiled the smile. The one that hides everything. Your father always told me to read things twice before I signed them, I said. Leave it with me. I'll look it over. Relief washed across his face. At the door he paused, and delivered the cruelest line of all light, like a man returning a borrowed tool. And maybe think about whether you really need this big house anymore. We could get you somewhere more manageable. He wanted the house too. He was already redecorating my life. After his car pulled away, I called Gerald. He brought me a document. Harold's lawyers drew it up. It signs everything to Marcus. A silence. Then Gerald, careful. Read me the exact language at the top of page 1. I read it to him. A longer silence. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Eleanor, that's not just deciding who gets the money after you're gone. There's a clause buried in paragraph 4. In plain English, it lets Marcus take control of your life right now, your accounts, your house, your decisions the moment anyone signs a paper saying you can't manage on your own. All it takes is one friendly doctor, the kind a man like Harold keeps on his Christmas card list, writing the word confused. He let it sit. They're not asking you to plan for your death, Eleanor. They're building a way to declare you helpless while you're still very much alive. I looked down at my own hands, steady, the hands of a woman who'd balanced this household's books for 50 years. They think I'm an old woman who'll sign whatever's put in front of her. Yes, Gerald said. They do. Then I want to understand every single option I have, and then I want to decide what's fair. I looked out at the porch, the chimes turning. Not what's angry, what's fair. That, said Gerald Vance, is exactly what Raymond said you'd want. Over the next 2 weeks, I learned that fairness and mercy are not the same thing, and that I'd have to choose between them with my eyes open. The trust was ironclad, built to survive exactly this weather. No paper Harold's lawyers could draw would override the power of appointment, because that power was mine and couldn't be signed away under pressure. The capacity clause was, in Gerald's blunt word, predatory. The fact that they'd written it at all told us everything about what they had planned for me. But there was a moment that made it real, that turned my cold clarity into something with a pulse. A week into all this, a man knocked on my door, pleasant, middle-aged, a clipboard under his arm. Said he was a physician doing a wellness check, that my son had expressed some concerns about Mom living alone. He hadn't called ahead. He just appeared on my porch, smiling, ready to assess whether I still had my mind. I told him, very politely, that I'd be happy to speak with him the moment my attorney could join us, and I watched the smile slip off his face, and I closed the door. Then I stood with my back against it, my heart going hard, and I understood that this was no longer a story about a rude son. They had sent someone to my home to find me unfit. That was the day I stopped grieving and started deciding. Gerald asked me the question plainly. Knowing all of this, do you still want to leave anything to your son? I thought about the boy asleep against my shoulder in church, the thunderstorms. Nothing bad can happen if I'm with you, Mama. And I thought about the cheap pen, and you're getting older, and a stranger on my porch with a clipboard sent to call me confused. I want to be fair to who he was, I said, not to who he's become. Tell me how. We built it together, quietly, the way Raymond would have. I exercised the power of appointment, but not the way Marcus expected. The bulk of the trust, after my lifetime, I directed into something new, the Raymond Hammond Foundation, to provide home care and dignity for elderly people whose families had stopped showing up, the kind of help Marie gave me without ever being asked. I set aside a generous, protected portion for André, held until he turned 25, that no one could ever pressure him to hand over. And for Marcus, I did something I think Raymond would have understood. I did not cut him to nothing. I left him a single fixed gift, enough to clear his debts honestly if he ever chose to, but nothing he could borrow against, nothing Harold could align, and with it, a letter, to be opened by him alone. Then, I did one more thing. There was to be a second event, a formal engagement party at the Whitfields, 200 guests, the senator, the whole orchestrated world Harold had built. Marcus kept pushing for the paperwork handled before then, so I called him and I told him he was right, that it was time things were settled properly. I could hear the smile come into his voice. I said I wanted to do it the right way, with everyone present, so there could never be any question later, and asked if I might bring my financial man to make it official. "Of course, Mum," he said, delighted. "Bring whoever you need. Harold will love that you're finally being reasonable." "I just don't want to embarrass you," I said softly. "Not again." No, he said, magnanimous now that he thought he'd won. "You won't. It'll be perfect." I hung up, and outside the chimes turned, and I thought, yes, it will be. The Whitfield house was lit like a small kingdom the night of the party. Cars lined the long drive. 200 people moved through rooms that cost more than most folks' houses, holding champagne, with Marcus and Sloane at the center, and Harold beside them holding court. I came in my blue dress, on the arm of Gerald Vance in his quiet grey suit, his old leather folder under his arm. André met us at the door. I'd asked him to stay close, and squeezed my hand once, hard. Marie had offered to drive me, and I'd told her no, I'd be all right, and she'd looked at me a long moment. "You've got that look, Miss Eleanor." The one my mother never got to have. I asked what look, like a woman who's about to stop apologizing. Then she hugged me and told me to call her when it was over, no matter the hour. About an hour in, Harold clinked a glass, and the room gathered. Toasts again, Harold, a partner, Sloane. Then Marcus took the floor, glowing, and said he had an announcement about the joining of the families, and turned, generous, to me. "Before I get to it, I want to thank my mother for being here. She's had a hard few years since we lost my father." A sympathetic murmur. "And she's graciously agreed to formalize some family matters tonight, so we can start this new chapter with everything in order. Mom, I believe you brought your financial advisor?" He gestured at Gerald with the ease of a man certain of his footing. "Why don't we let him say a quick word, and then we'll get the paperwork done and get back to the party." He thought Gerald was there to hand him the keys. Gerald Vance stepped forward, set his folder on the grand piano, opened it, unhurried, and put on his reading glasses. "Thank you, Marcus. I'll be brief. My name is Gerald Vance. I was Raymond Hammond's attorney for 30 years, and his friend longer than that. And for 11 years, I've served as the sole trustee of the Hammond Family Trust." A pause. "There are some things about that trust this family has misunderstood. So with Eleanor's permission, I'd like to correct the record, tonight, in front of everyone, so there can never be any question later." I saw the first flicker of doubt cross Marcus's face. In front of everyone. That had been his idea of safety. Now it turned in his hand. "The Hammond Family Trust holds the entirety of Raymond Hammond's estate," Gerald said, in the dry, clear voice of a man reading the truth aloud. "It cannot be undone. And contrary to what some here believe, it was never the property of his son. In plain words, for everyone in this lovely room, while she lives, every dollar belongs to the care of one person, and one person only, Eleanor Hammond, not Marcus, not the Whitfield family. Eleanor." The room had gone very still. Harold Whitfield's smile had stopped moving. And the question of who inherits after her lifetime, Gerald went on, rests with Eleanor alone. No document drawn up by any other party, he did not so much as glance at Harold, which was its own kind of glance, can override it or compel it. I've reviewed the paper recently put in front of Mrs. Hammond to sign. I'll only say this, had she signed it, it would not have been valid. And it would not have been kind. He let it land. She did not sign it. Marcus's voice came out thin. Mr. Vance, I think there's been some confusion. No confusion, son, Gerald said, not unkindly. Let me finish, because 2 weeks ago, Mrs. Hammond did decide who inherits, freely. In sound mind, which I've documented thoroughly, 3 physicians, should anyone ever care to ask. He looked up, found me across the room, and gave the smallest nod. Eleanor, would you like to tell them, or shall I finish? Every face in that gold-lit room had turned to me. 200 of them, the senator, Harold, gone grey around the mouth, Sloane, frozen. And Marcus, my Marcus, staring at me as though seeing me, actually seeing me, for the first time in years. I stepped forward. I did not raise my voice. I've never had to. 3 weeks ago, at my son's engagement dinner, he leaned down and told me I was embarrassing him, and asked me to sit quietly and not say anything else. The room was so silent I could hear the ice settle in a glass. So I sat quietly, and I let other people talk. I looked at Marcus. Tonight, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to let the trustee finish speaking. I turned. Go on, Gerald. And Gerald Vance finished the sentence that ended one version of my family and began another. After Eleanor's lifetime, the assets of the Hammond Family Trust shall pass to the Raymond Hammond Foundation for the care of the elderly and the abandoned, with a protected provision for her grandson, Andre Hammond, and a single specific gift to her son, Marcus, with a personal letter. He closed the folder. That is the whole of it. It is final. It is hers. And no one in this room can undo it. For a moment, nobody breathed. Then Harold Whitfield set down his glass with a small, hard click and said, to no one and everyone, well, just that. The sound of a man recalculating an investment. And I watched Sloane understand, in that syllable, that the merger her father wanted was never going to happen. But here is the thing I didn't expect. She didn't look at Marcus with contempt. She looked at him with something almost like sadness, and then she looked at me and gave the smallest nod, the way one woman tells another, I see it now. I think some part of her had known all along that he was trying too hard to be a man he wasn't. I think, in a different family, with different fathers, she might have been all right. She set her own glass down and stepped back from Marcus, quietly, and that was the truest answer she ever gave. Marcus crossed the room toward me, fast, his voice low and shaking. What did you do? Do you have any idea what you just did to me? In front of everyone? You humiliated me, Mother. I looked at my son, and I felt no triumph. I want to tell you that honestly. People imagine a moment like this feels like winning. It doesn't. It feels like a funeral. No, Marcus, I said quietly. I told the truth, calmly, in a room full of people. That's only humiliating if the truth about you is humiliating. I reached up and, very gently, patted his shoulder, twice. The way you'd pat a dog. The way he'd patted me. We love you, I said, in his own bright voice from 3 weeks before. And then, just to him, I always will, but I'm done being quiet. Andre was at my side now, his hand finding mine. Gerald picked up his folder. And the 3 of us walked out of the Whitfield kingdom together, past 200 silent faces, into the cool dark where, across the city, my own porch chimes were turning in the wind. The collapse came quickly, the way it does for things built on the wrong foundation. The engagement didn't survive the month. It was Sloane who ended it, and I believe, after what I saw at the party, that it wasn't only about the money for her. Harold withdrew his blessing and his rooms, and Marcus discovered, all at once, that the circle he'd traded his family for had only ever valued him as a fixture the same way he'd valued me. The debts he'd hidden came due. The watch went. He threatened, once, to contest, to claim I'd been manipulated. But Gerald had 3 physicians, a paper trail, and 200 witnesses to an evening where I was the calmest mind in the room. The lawyer Marcus consulted told him the plain truth. There was nothing to contest. The verdict had already been delivered, quietly, in a place where everyone could see it. I did not gloat. I hadn't done any of it to make him suffer. I'd done it to make myself safe, and to send Raymond's life toward people who'd honor it. What I felt, mostly, was grief not for the money he lost, but for the man he might have been if money had never gotten its hands around his throat. Marie came by that evening, and I told her everything, and she sat with me on the porch while the chimes turned. She didn't say I'm proud of you. She just took my hand the way she'd taken her dying mother's and said, "You showed up. For yourself, this time." And we sat there in the dark, not talking, which is the best kind of company. A year passed, and my life did something I'd stopped believing it could. It got fuller. The Raymond Hammond Foundation opened that spring 3 rooms above a bakery with Marie Dawson as its first director. She'd resisted, said she was just a caregiver. I told her that was exactly the point. The people who never ask for anything are precisely the ones who should be trusted with everything. Within 6 months, we had 11 caregivers showing up for women and men whose families had wandered off. We put the mission on the wall, in Raymond's handwriting, copied from one of his old grocery receipt notes. Just show up. Andre still comes every Saturday. We shell butter beans and don't talk. And when he turned 17, I taught him to drive Raymond's old truck, which I'd never had the heart to sell. He stalled it 9 times in the church parking lot, and we laughed until I cried. He's going to study to be a doctor, he says, the kind that takes care of old people. He says he got the idea from his grandmother. I tell him he got it from his grandfather, and that I just kept the porch warm. And Marcus. About 10 months after the party, an envelope arrived in my mailbox, addressed in his careless, slanting version of his father's handwriting. Inside, 1 sheet. "Mom, I opened the letter you left me. I asked Gerald for it early. You wrote that you forgave me before you ever signed anything, and that the gift you left me wasn't money, it was a door. And I could walk through it whenever I stopped trying to buy my way into rooms that were never going to love me. I've read it about 100 times. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know I finally understand what I had and what I traded it for. I'm sorry I told you to be quiet. You were the only one in that whole family who was ever worth listening to. Marcus." I read it on the porch, with the chimes going, and I cried not the quiet tears I'd learned to cry, but the other kind, the kind that comes when something you'd buried turns out to still be alive. I haven't given him the money. Forgiveness and trust are not the same thing, and I made my peace with that distinction long ago. But I called him. We talk now, on Sundays, the way we used to. He's working, really working, with his hands, like his father did, clearing his debts honestly, a little at a time. Last month he asked if he could bring Andre by for supper, the 3 of us, in the dining room, with all 3 places set. I said yes. It's a beginning. I've learned not to ask any beginning to be more than that. Sometimes I sit on the porch in the evening and take out Raymond's fountain pen, the heavy black one, and just hold it. It's the pen I used to sign the appointment in Gerald's office, the only time in my life I've signed a document that decided the fate of everything we built. My husband signed his whole life with that pen, every check and birthday card and grocery receipt note, and he saved 1 signature for me without ever telling me, the most important one, the one that was always going to be mine. Here is what I know now, at 71, that I wish I'd known at 60. Being quiet to keep the peace is not the same as being at peace. For years I let people make me smaller because I thought love meant absorbing whatever was handed to me. It doesn't. Love has a spine. The people who truly love you will never need you to disappear so they can be comfortable. Your worth does not shrink because you got older. They'll tell you it does, you're getting older. Let us handle it, don't be difficult, don't be emotional, and those words are not concern, they're a door closing. Don't let anyone file you away while you're still here. And kindness, the kind that shows up and asks for nothing, is rarer and more valuable than any inheritance. When you find it, in a caregiver or a grandchild, or an old friend in a grey suit, hold on. That's the family you get to choose. That's the table worth setting all the places for. Justice doesn't always arrive with a verdict read aloud in a courtroom. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in a calm voice, in a crowded room, in a sentence a patient man is finally allowed to finish, and in a signature only the deserving ever see. If this story reached something in you, I'd be grateful if you'd let me know. Have you ever had to find your voice after years of staying quiet? Have you ever forgiven someone without handing them the keys again? Tell me in the comments, your story might be the thing that helps someone else find their spine tonight. And if these stories mean something to you, please like, subscribe, and share. No matter how invisible you've ever felt, remember this: you are worth listening to. You always were. And it is never, ever too late to stop being quiet.